Before Walmart, before Amazon, there was Main Street, where every handshake meant something, and the butcher knew your name. Kids rode bikes without helmets, neighbors left doors unlocked, and life felt simple. What happened to that world? In towns across America during the 1960s, Main Street wasn't just a road lined with storefronts. It was the beating heart of everyday life. The rhythm of a Saturday morning meant families strolling together, fathers tipping their hats to the barber sweeping his steps, children pressing their noses to the candy shop window, and mothers chatting with the grocer while picking out the week's produce. It was a place where time seemed to move slower, where business was as much about trust and conversation as it was about the exchange of money. The butcher shop carried more than meat. It carried stories. Customers lingered, talking about ball games or the weather while their cuts were wrapped in crisp white paper. Some families didn't pay right away. Instead, the butcher scribbled their names on a little tab behind the counter with the understanding that payment would come when it could. That kind of informal credit system wasn't questioned. It was rooted in faith, in the knowledge that neighbors looked out for each other. Life extended beyond the stores. It spilled onto the sidewalks and into the streets. Children set out in the morning on their bikes, their pockets filled with marbles or baseball cards, and no one worried when they disappeared for hours. Parents knew they would return by dusk, guided home by the orange glow of streetlights and the smell of supper drifting from open windows. Trust was woven into the fabric of the community, so tightly stitched that doors were often left unlocked. Screen doors creaking in the evening breeze, signaling that no lock was needed between friends. The soda fountain at the corner drugstore was its own kind of gathering place. Teenagers crowded into booths, sipping cherry cokes, sharing jukebox tunes, and carving initials into wooden tabletops that would hold those marks for years. Each small moment, each casual laugh and handshake built a sense of belonging that made the community feel like an extended family. In that world, identity wasn't found online, but in the faces you passed every day, in the shopkeepers who knew your children's names, and in the neighbors who noticed if you weren't at Sunday service. That era of simple, face-to-face trust now feels like something out of a photograph sepia-toned, faded at the edges, yet unforgettable. It wasn't perfect, but it offered something today's world struggles to replicate: a shared sense of place, where belonging didn't need to be bought or broadcast, it was simply lived. But as the decades rolled on, America's way of living and even trusting would never be the same. In the 1960s, the car wasn't just transportation, it was freedom. Teens piled into station wagons, seatbelts dangling unused, cruising with the windows down. The road stretched endlessly ahead, and with it came a sense of possibility that defined a generation. To own a set of keys was to own independence, and for many, those four wheels carried more than passengers, they carried identity. Each car told its own story. Muscle cars roared with power and pride, their engines echoing rebellion and youthful daring. The Volkswagen van, with its hand-painted swirls and flower decals, became the rolling symbol of counterculture and free-spirited living. For families, the station wagon was less about style and more about togetherness. Packed with coolers, picnic baskets, and restless kids leaning out of windows, those long-bodied cars carried memories to campgrounds, beaches, and national parks. It wasn't simply about where the road led. It was about who rode with you. Safety wasn't the first thought when climbing inside. Seatbelts existed, but were often left untouched, tucked between the cushions, more nuisance than necessity. Children sat perched on laps in the front seat, or sprawled across the back without a thought of restraint. Windows were rolled down to let in warm summer air, arms hanging freely as the landscape blurred past. The risks were real, but few paused to think about them. The car was a vessel of freedom, not confinement, and that freedom was affordable. Gas prices were so low that long drives were not indulgences but regular escapes. Road trips became a cultural tradition, Maps spread across dashboards, motels lined with neon signs, and families marveling at roadside attractions from giant statues to quirky diners. The journey was as important as the destination, and in many ways, it was the journey that shaped the bonds between those who traveled together. Evenings often ended at the drive-in, headlights dimmed as cars lined up before a giant glowing screen. Teenagers slipped into the back seat with popcorn buckets and soda cups, their radios tuned to the film's crackling broadcast. For some, the drive-in was more about conversation and stolen glances than the movie itself. Across town, drive-in diners kept trays balanced on rolled-down windows, burgers and milkshakes served straight to the car. The automobile wasn't just part of life. It was the stage where life unfolded. Today, the picture looks starkly different. Strict seatbelt laws, child safety seats, and high gas prices have changed the way we drive and travel. Cars remain important, but they no longer carry the same weight of discovery or rebellion. Freedom has been reshaped into convenience, and the open road feels more controlled than boundless. Still, for those who remember, there will always be a part of the heart that hears the echo of a muscle car at dusk or the laughter spilling out of a wagon's open windows. But the road wasn't the only place freedom looked different. Home itself followed a very different rhythm. A single black and white TV in the living room was once enough for an entire family. It stood like a piece of furniture, heavy and humming softly, its glowing screen pulling parents and children together in the evenings. For many households, television wasn't background noise or a distraction. It was an event. The options were few, and that was part of the magic. 3 or 4 networks delivered the nightly news, sitcoms, westerns, and variety shows, and families made time to gather for them. When a favorite program came on, everything else paused. Dinner dishes were washed a little faster, homework tucked away, and kids hurried into their pajamas, ready to stake out the best spot on the couch. Appointment television wasn't just about the show itself, it was about the ritual of watching together. Sharing the screen meant sharing reactions. Laughter rolled across the room when a punchline landed, gasps rose in unison during cliffhangers, and even the silence of commercials carried a kind of unity. Those ads, with their catchy jingles and cheerful promises, became woven into memory. Decades later, people still hum the tunes that once filled living rooms, proof of how deeply those moments became part of the culture. Outside the glow of the TV, though, life was full of play. With no endless catalog of streaming shows or handheld screens to keep them indoors, children spilled into yards, parks, and sidewalks until the sun went down. Games of tag, stickball, and hopscotch stretched into the evening, interrupted only by the call of a parent's voice carried through the neighborhood air. Screens were rare, but the world outside was wide and endlessly entertaining. That scarcity made television special. When families gathered, it wasn't just passive watching, it was bonding. Parents explained the jokes their children didn't understand. Siblings fought over the best seat. And everyone knew that when the nightly news played, it was time to pay attention. For better or worse, TV was a shared lens on the wider world, and it shaped the way people talked, laughed, and even dreamed. Contrast that with today, where each person often holds their own screen, scrolling silently through personalized feeds. Shows no longer demand a schedule. They wait patiently in endless digital queues. Families may sit together in the same room, yet their eyes are on separate worlds, headphones sealing off even the smallest shared reaction. What was once a collective ritual has fractured into private habits. Still, those memories of crowding around a single flickering screen linger as a reminder of a time when technology brought people together more than it pulled them apart. The living room TV wasn't just about what played on the screen. It was about the faces that gathered around it. And just as families once shared screens, they also shared something else we almost never see today: family meals. At 6 o'clock sharp, the table was set, and the whole family sat down together. It wasn't just about eating. it was about connection. In the 1960s, dinner was the anchor of the day, a ritual that brought parents and children into the same room, around the same dishes, at the same time. The meals themselves carried the flavor of the era. Casseroles bubbled in glass baking dishes, meatloaf rested in pans with a ketchup glaze, and Jell-O salads studded with fruit or marshmallows often appeared in shimmering colors. Everything was made at home, from scratch, with recipes passed down or clipped from magazines. The kitchen filled with the aroma of roasting chicken or simmering stews, smells that drifted through hallways and reminded children playing outside that it was almost time to come in. At the table, distractions were few. There were no smartphones buzzing, no television streaming in the background. Instead, there was conversation the kind that stitched families together. Parents asked about school and work. Brothers and sisters squabbled lightly over who got the biggest scoop of mashed potatoes. Stories of the day unfolded, sometimes mundane, sometimes exciting, but always shared. It was in those everyday exchanges that children learned to listen, to speak, and to feel that their voices mattered. The dinner table was also where lessons in manners took root. Napkins in laps, elbows off the table, please, and thank you, repeated until they became a habit. Beyond etiquette, the rhythm of dinner gave structure to childhood itself. Knowing that at 6 o'clock the family would be gathered provided a steady heartbeat to the day, a sense of order and belonging that extended beyond the meal. As the decades passed, that ritual began to change. Fast food restaurants multiplied, offering quick meals that didn't require ovens or dining rooms. Work schedules grew longer and less predictable, and children's activities stretched late into the evening. Soon, it became harder for families to find the same hour to sit down together. Today, many meals are eaten on the go, in cars, or separately in bedrooms, each person balancing a plate while scrolling through a screen. The dinner table, once a stage for connection, has too often become an afterthought. Yet the memory of those dinners lingers. The clink of silverware, the laughter over spilled milk, the warmth of being gathered close, it all represents more than food. It represents the rhythm of family life, a rhythm that defined an era. But when the meal ended, another ritual began, one that lit up every block. In the 1960s, kids didn't check their phones. They checked the streetlights. As long as the sun was still up, the neighborhood was their playground. Sidewalks, yards, and empty lots transformed into ball fields, forts, and secret hideouts. The rules were simple. Be home when the streetlights came on, and until then, the world outside was wide open. Children roamed in packs, darting between games of tag, hide and seek, and kick the can. Baseball diamonds were scratched into dirt fields with makeshift bases, and hopscotch grids chalked onto sidewalks wore down under the shuffle of sneakers. Bikes carried kids farther than their parents knew, their laughter trailing behind as they sped down hills with no helmets, no knee pads, just the thrill of speed. The freedom was intoxicating, and it belonged to every child lucky enough to hear the slam of the screen door as they bolted outside after school. Parents weren't far, but they weren't hovering. They trusted that neighbors watched out for one another and that children would wander back when it was time. It wasn't about constant supervision, it was about confidence in the community. Trouble was minor and expected. A scraped knee, a torn shirt, a ball lost in someone's bushes. Safety was assumed, not orchestrated. The streetlight rule became a universal curfew, unspoken yet understood by every child. One by one, as the lamps flickered to life, games came to an end. The last one's home is tomorrow. Someone shouted as bikes scattered down driveways and front doors slammed shut. That soft glow overhead wasn't just about visibility. It was a reminder that the day's adventures were over, and home was waiting with warmth, food, and maybe a scoop of ice cream before bed. Those twilight hours taught children more than games. They learned how to settle arguments without adults stepping in, how to negotiate rules, how to lead, and how to follow. They built friendships in real time, face to face, often sweaty, dusty, and full of laughter. The lessons of outdoor play stretched beyond childhood. They built resilience, imagination, and social skills that no structured program could replicate. Today, the scene has shifted. Parents are more cautious, neighborhoods feel less certain, and playdates are scheduled instead of spontaneous. Children often spend evenings indoors, glued to screens, while parents hover nearby, worried about dangers that once barely crossed anyone's mind. The streetlight rule has been replaced by reminders to charge tablets or log off before bed. Yet for those who lived it, the memory of running freely beneath the fading lights still glows as brightly as the lamps themselves. It was a kind of freedom that shaped a generation, a childhood measured not in hours or apps, but in the slow drift of daylight. And while kids had their streetlights, teens had another beacon of freedom, the jukebox glow. A nickel in the jukebox could turn a diner into a concert. With one press of a button, the room filled with the unmistakable rhythm of rock and roll, and suddenly the clinking of silverware and the chatter of teenagers gave way to Elvis crooning or the Beatles harmonizing. In the 1960s, music wasn't just something you listened to. It was a current running through every corner of American life. Rock and roll reigned supreme. Elvis Presley shook the foundations of tradition with his swiveling hips and raw sound. The Beatles swept across the Atlantic, sparking Beatlemania that transformed haircuts, fashion, and teenage identity. Motown filled radios with smooth harmonies and irresistible beats, its artists turning Detroit into the soul capital of the world. Music wasn't just entertainment, it was rebellion, romance, and revolution packaged into 3-minute songs that everyone seemed to know by heart. And it was everywhere. Diners kept their jukeboxes humming, neon lights flashing as teens crowded booths with fries and milkshakes. Dance halls pulsed with sock hops, sneakers sliding across polished floors as couples spun and twirled to the latest hits. Bedrooms echoed with the soft crackle of record players, vinyl sleeves stacked in messy piles beside twin beds. Radios in cars blasted top 40 stations, their signal carrying miles down open highways, giving even late-night drives a soundtrack. Radio DJs were more than voices. They were tastemakers. With charisma and style, they introduced songs that would become the backdrop to first dances, summer romances, and late-night conversations. Their influence was unmatched, shaping what teens sang, what they bought, and how they saw themselves. To tune in was to be part of a larger community, a wave of listeners all hearing the same songs at the same moment. For teenagers, music wasn't background, it was identity. Every sock hop, every concert, every record spinning in a bedroom was a declaration of who you were and who you wanted to be. It was the glue of youth culture, shared so widely that a hit single could unite kids in small towns and big cities alike. When a song played, you knew countless others were hearing it too, humming the same melody, feeling the same thrill. Today, music still holds power, but the way it's consumed has changed. Streaming offers endless choice, yet with that choice comes fragmentation. Everyone carries their own playlist in their pocket, but rarely do we gather around a single sound together. The magic of hearing the same hit on the same station at the same time has faded, replaced by earbuds and algorithms. Still, those who lived it remember the joy of dropping a nickel in the jukebox and watching a room transform. For a few minutes, it felt like the world was singing in unison. But music wasn't the only sound of the 60s. There was also silence in ways that would shock us today. In a world before smartphones, silence wasn't awkward. It was normal. In the 1960s, life carried long stretches of quiet, broken only by the ring of a landline or the creak of the mailbox lid. There was no buzzing in your pocket, no screen lighting up every few minutes, no constant reminder that someone, somewhere, demanded your attention. Life was lived at a gentler pace, and disconnection wasn't a privilege. It was simply the way things were. Communication tethered people, quite literally, to the wall. The family phone often hung in the kitchen or sat heavy on a hallway table. Its cord stretched thin as kids tried to sneak private conversations around the corner. Calls weren't constant, and they weren't expected to be. If you missed one, the world didn't collapse. It just meant the caller would try again later. Long-distance talking was expensive, reserved for special occasions or urgent news, so letters remained the steady heartbeat of keeping in touch. The arrival of an envelope, handwritten and stamped, carried anticipation and meaning far greater than a text could ever match. Vacations were true escapes. When families loaded into the station wagon and drove off to the mountains or the beach, they left their daily world behind completely. No work emails chased them down. No social media tethered them back home. A postcard dropped in the mail was the only way to share the experience, often arriving after the vacation was already over. Weekends, too, belonged to rest. Once the office door shut on Friday evening, it stayed shut until Monday morning. Work stayed at work, and home stayed sacred. Patience was not optional, it was a part of life. Waiting in line meant simply waiting, not scrolling. Sitting at the doctor's office or the bus stop meant flipping through a magazine or simply thinking. Delayed gratification wasn't frustrating. It was expected. Children learned to save their allowance for weeks to buy a toy. Teenagers waited days to hear their favorite song on the radio again. And adults sometimes waited months to see photos developed from a vacation. Life moved slower, and people moved with it. Contrast that with today, where silence often feels like a void we rush to fill. Phones buzz constantly with alerts, emails follow us across time zones, and even vacations come with a steady stream of digital connection. Moments that once held stillness are now crammed with notifications, and waiting feels almost impossible in a world of instant access. Yet for those who lived in the 1960s, those quiet stretches are remembered with a kind of fondness. The absence of constant connection didn't feel like a loss. It felt like normal life. Without digital noise, conversations lingered longer, days felt fuller, and minds wandered freely. There's an irony to it now. In all our connectedness, something vital about living unplugged has slipped away. And as life moved slower, so did the news often delivered in ways almost unimaginable today. In the 1960s, the news arrived at your doorstep, printed on paper, not pushed to your pocket. It came with the thud of the morning delivery, folded neatly in plastic on rainy days or tucked under an arm on the walk home. People read it over coffee at the kitchen table or in an armchair after dinner, scanning headlines that felt steady, measured, and contained. News wasn't an endless stream. It was a moment in the day. The evening brought another ritual, the nightly broadcast. Families gathered in their living rooms, adjusting the antenna as trusted anchors delivered the day's most important stories. These men, figures like Walter Cronkite, were more than reporters. They were voices of authority and reassurance, guiding viewers through triumphs and tragedies alike. When they spoke, the tone carried weight, a sense of dignity that made the information feel both serious and reliable. The pace of news was slower, but that slowness carried value. Events unfolded without the blur of constant updates, giving space for reflection rather than reaction. Headlines remained on the front page for days, sometimes weeks, allowing people to truly absorb their meaning. There was less noise, fewer distractions competing for attention, and in that quiet, people could weigh the importance of what they read and heard. World events were not consumed in isolation. They were shared. Families discussed headlines over dinner. Neighbors compared opinions at the barbershop or grocery store, and children learned about politics and history through the conversations swirling around them. National moments carried a sense of collective experience. When President Kennedy was assassinated, the grief spread not through instant posts or hashtags, but through solemn faces, black and white broadcasts. and hushed conversations in every household. When the Apollo 11 moon landing aired, millions watched the same grainy images together, united in awe. That unity feels harder to capture today. With non-stop feeds updating by the second, news rarely lingers long enough for reflection. Stories compete for clicks, headlines blur, and the weight of events is often lost in the flood. What was once a daily rhythm has become a constant hum, leaving little space for the silence that once gave news its gravity. For those who remember, the slowness of news in the 1960s was not a flaw but a feature. It gave people the gift of time to think, to talk, and to process the meaning of what was happening in their world. But even as the world was changing, one thing held families and communities together: the simple joy of gathering. Life in the 60s wasn't perfect, but it was personal. Every moment carried a kind of closeness, a sense of being part of something larger than yourself. It was in the shopkeeper who knew your name, the family dinners that set the rhythm of the day, the streetlights that signaled it was time to come home. It was a world shaped less by convenience and more by connection, where trust was assumed and community was the foundation. We remember the rituals that once defined the everyday. Main Street, alive with the sound of footsteps and friendly chatter, where neighbors stopped to shake hands and shopkeepers offered credit on trust alone. Evenings anchored by family meals, homemade casseroles and laughter filling the kitchen as parents and children shared their days. Childhood spent outside, ruled by the streetlight's glow, where scraped knees and wild imaginations shaped resilience and friendship. Each piece formed a patchwork of life that was ordinary then, but feels extraordinary now. Music poured from jukeboxes, radios, and record players, giving voice to a generation, while televisions flickered with shared stories that pulled families together on the couch. Vacations meant true disconnection. News traveled at a slower pace, and silence was not an absence but a presence, a reminder that not every moment needed to be filled. These rhythms created a culture that, though simple, left lasting marks on those who lived it. To reflect on that world is not to dismiss the progress since the advances in safety, equality, and opportunity that have reshaped America. But with every gain, something slipped quietly away. The slower pace, the deep roots of community trust, the patience that came with waiting, the togetherness born not of screens but of presence. The America of the 60s may no longer exist, yet its essence still lingers in memory, reminding us of what truly mattered. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson the past offers, that convenience is not the same as connection, and speed does not always equal fulfillment. What endures are the relationships, the rituals, and the moments of belonging that no technology can replace. If the 1960s taught us anything, it's that life feels richest not when it moves fastest, but when it is lived most closely, side by side. Because the past may be gone, but its lessons still shine. Share your favorite memory of 60s America in the comments below.